and welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. Welcome to another bonus episode of the Trusty Chords podcast. This week, we're chatting to the great Kevin Devine. By his own admission, you probably haven't heard of Kevin, but for almost 30 years now, he's been a prolific musician who treats making music in much the same way the rest of us treat the need to breathe. That is to say, he deems it to be pretty bloody important. In fact, in addition to a solo career, Kevin's been a member of bands like Infind, Delusion, who later renamed themselves Miracle of 86, and Bad Books, which features members of Manchester Orchestra. Plus, he's also got a pretty fruitful solo career, both under his own name and with his backing band, The Goddamn Band. Needless to say, if you've not heard of Kevin Devine, well, now's the time to get on board. You certainly won't be left wanting when it comes to content. Usually when I do these podcasts, I kick things off by talking about the most recent release an artist has put out. But the thing is, Kevin is so gosh darn prolific that he's probably dropped a few more records since I started recording this intro. However, he is going to have to take a bit of time off when he heads to Australia this week for his first tour here in 10 years. Ahead of his long overdue trip down south, I was lucky enough to have a chat with Kevin for the podcast. So before you give it a listen, take a few days to listen through his exhaustive discography, and then when you're done realizing how much time has passed, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Kevin Devine, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, you're an incredibly prolific musician, to put it, I guess, simply, and you're very well known in certain musical circles. But for those unaware of your name, can you give me a quick few words on who you are and why we're chatting today?
I think it's so generous that you would say I'm well known in certain musical circles, because that's not maybe what I would say right off the top of my head. So my name is Kevin Devine. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I've been playing music for a long time, more than half of my life in bands and stuff. And I've been touring, for like 24 years at this point. And I'm trying to think what would be relevant to say. I guess it is true that I've made a bunch of records. I've made 10 under my name. And I have a band called Bad Books with the Manchester Orchestra guys that's made 3 records. I used to play in a group called Miracle of 86, made a couple records, and I put out, arguably too much music, but I like doing it, so it keeps happening. And there's enough people that seem to be interested in it to, for now, justify my continued attempts to drag it around the world, 100 people at a time. But yeah, that's the guts of it. I write songs and play them in front of people, and I have for quite a while now, which is a pretty big gift for me.
And it's those voracious fans that you play in front of and make music for that make up those certain musical circles I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because yours is always a name who, whenever I hear about it, a lot of people always, or I should say, a lot of people don't necessarily know who it is right away. But when you sort of say, "Oh, it's Kevin from this band" or something, they usually would say, "Oh, I know that band. I really like this song" or something. And
right.
it definitely feels like you're an artist whose music is well known, although you're certainly not in the mainstream. And I mean, hey, one day, let's keep hoping.
Sure. And also, I think, you're right. And I think that for someone like me, look, there's a lot of ways people can spend their time. And if anyone chooses to spend any of it with the music you make, that's it's kind of amazing, especially in 2024 with I don't think we've ever been more entertained, the capacity, and probably also more bored as a result of that. But I definitely think what I will say is, while I don't have millions of audience members, the some thousands that are interested in what I make, they do seem to really deeply connect to it. And I think that's really kind of a dream, because you get to do whatever you get to make whatever you want, and the people who care about it really, really care. It's not casual, and that's pretty great. So yeah, I wouldn't trade it. I like what I have.
That's completely fair. And on that topic of spending time with audiences, thank you for joining this audience of one today. So while we have a bit of a chat here, and
I love it.
So this podcast format usually sees us turning to the 1, 3, and 5 structure of the standard chord, which is why it's called Trusty Chords. So we go from there by looking at 1 artist, 3 albums, and 5 songs you can always turn to. So Kevin, the first question for you here is, who is the 1 artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
I'm going to not think too much and just answer these questions intuitively. And it's Elliott Smith.
Wonderful. And
Yeah.
why Elliott Smith?
Well, I think that as I found his music at a very formative time in my life, my freshman year of college, 1997, 98. I'm 44, so that was my freshman year of college. I was going to a school called Fordham University, campus at Lincoln Center in Manhattan, New York City. I'd grown up in Brooklyn and Staten Island. And going to this city for school. The Big Smoke was kind of, that was a formative, like, transitional moment into the very beginnings of early adulthood and living on my own in the middle of Manhattan, whatever. And I'd come up with like alternative rock music, became indie rock music, and became like punk and hardcore and bits of like earlier waves of emo. And so it was like Nirvana, Sonic Youth, the Pixies, Pavement, and then like Helium, Superchunk, Cat Power, Sunny Day Real Estate, that kind of stuff. And then, but I was also into this songwriter strain that my mom had kind of given me, like Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez and Buffy St. Marie and Phil Oakes and a little bit of 70s stuff, Paul Simon and Springsteen and Jackson Brown or whatever. But I was definitely more of like a punk indie rock person. And Elliot arrived at this moment for me where it was like he was both of those things. He was definitely indebted to punk tradition with his presentation and with his kind of ethic. But the songs he was writing and performing were so much more skilled and what's the word, like sophisticated
Yeah.
than most people who were on things like Kill Rock Stars or whatever, whose music I love. I love a lot of those Kill Rock Stars bands, but they weren't. I mean, Elliott Smith is like a generational talent, with both as a writer and also as an arranger, what he could do instrumentally, what he heard harmonically, the way he wrote lyrically was like Raymond Carver or Flannery O'Connor, like short stories, economy of language. And so for me, he was he just sort of came at this moment, and I saw him play a bunch my freshman year, all through college. My freshman year, as he was like on the Either Or Goodwill Hunting thing was happening, but he was living in Brooklyn, so I would see him play shows in Manhattan, and just seeing this guy sit alone on like a metal folding chair and just be like endlessly captivating and in such like mastery of this material. I don't know if I'm not saying I'm not saying that what am telling you at 44, I fully understood in articulation at 18. But I just knew I was seeing something that was like, I remember watching him play a show at Tramps in 1998, March or something of 1998, and being like, just to having one of those like, oh, this is what I first it was like, oh, you could do that. Like you could be that commanding this way.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, well, I want to try to do that. And I really do think like I've sort of in my estimation, like he's the mountaintop. I feel like I feel like he's the person I'll be grateful to be chasing in my mind forever. He's like music school forever.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, he would be the one I would pick.
He's just such a absolutely wonderful musician, and especially around that time you mentioned, like, the whole Goodwill Hunting sort of era. I mean, it's very strange to sort of know he was someone who would be playing these smaller shows and then, going off to the Academy Awards and performing in front of thousands around the world like that. And but he still had that really humble, gorgeous nature to his music. And I think his loss is certainly a one that the music industry still feels as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I certainly know I feel it and all my friends do. And I think you can see his influence. He's one of those people, I guess, like Nick Drake or somebody like that, where it's like maybe Lauren Nero would be one of these people where it's like or the Velvet Underground, where like the influence so far outpasses even the impact that was had in the moment.
Of
And all
course.
of those artists had serious impact in the moment, and he did as well. But I mean, it's very clear. I think for the generation of songwriters that came up afterwards, my generation, and then the group of kids that have come up after me, I think he's become like a foundational text. He is like a Beatles, Dylan. He is that level of influence on an entire generation of songwriters, attitudinally as much and emotionally as much as aesthetically. And I just happened to be fortunate enough by an accident of fate to be there while it was happening a little bit. I never met him or anything, but just to like go see him. I've probably saw him play like 10 or 12 times.
Wow.
And yeah, he was the best. I think he was the best. For my tastes, he was the best.
Of course, and that's all that matters, isn't it? Your taste. And speaking of that taste,
Mhm.
what are 3 albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums
Uh,
you're always throwing on or something that was actually integral to your musical evolution.
It'd have to be Nevermind.
Mhm.
Uh, the reason I'm talking to you is because I heard that record when I was
Yeah.
12, and I was like, and I saw them play, not live. I saw them on TV, and I was like, oh, like you don't have to look like Slash or like Michael Jackson to do this. You could like look like those guys look like they could be my friends. You know what I mean?
It was suddenly attainable.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a lot of complexity to that idea, but it looked that way anyway. Um, Never mind for sure. I mean, I would almost tuck In Utero in there as one album, even though they're very different albums. That just their presence above ground on those two records. I'd have to say, I guess, like either or XO. I'm like kind of hybridizing some things here, but I would put that there too because I think it also showed me that you could. I feel like Elliot showed you could be every bit as kind of tough and expressive as like punk rock bands without sort of sacrificing craft, and the dynamics can work like left to right, not just up and down.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm still chasing the arrangement ideas and some of the melodic harmonic ideas. A third record, let's try to pick something from later, I guess. Um, yeah, I feel like I guess probably something for me would be like that Neutral Milk Hotel record, that In the
Okay.
Airplane Over the Sea, when I was like whatever age I was when I found that. Just felt like a weird, pure document, some transmission of something unembarrassed of its own weirdnesses and opennesses. And there was an amazing, what's the word, like amateur quality to it that was, but that made it better than if all those people could play.
Yeah, of
It actually
course.
made the music cooler. And his lyrics on that record feel like a visitation. I could say a million things, but let's just say those three. No thinking.
Yeah.
Never
No.
mind. Either or, In the Airplane Over the Sea.
That is perfect, and I also think that's the first time that someone's listed 3 albums that I have directly behind me on my shelf as well, so
There you go.
you're in good company here.
There you go.
And lastly, Kevin, I'd love to know the 5 songs you can always turn to, whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all, your 5
Oh my
trusty
God.
songs. Yeah, it's a
True
tough
Love
one.
will True Love, I'm just gonna go off the top of my head, and they're gonna be songs I've sung to my daughter to try to
Mhm.
help her go to sleep at night, which maybe when you hear them is maybe maybe I should have picked other songs. True Love Will Find You in the End by Daniel Johnston.
Yeah.
Um, The Biggest Lie by Elliott Smith. Um, oh my God. This Is to Mother You by Sinead O'Connor. Let's see. Oh my God. A Change Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. Um, and the fifth one we will say is All Apologies. All Apologies by Nirvana. Those are the 5. I'll just say those 5. It's top of my head. Those are the 5.
I hugely appreciate the very concise nature because so many people spend about 2 minutes just umming and ahhing, and it's wonderful to have someone like yourself have such a wonderful approach to it all, Kevin.
I'm working on it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Kevin Devine, I want to say thank you so much for your time and for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast today.
An honor. Thank you. Take it easy, Tyler.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. Ordinarily, this is the part of the podcast where I say that if you enjoyed this episode, it would be great if you're able to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on whatever your preferred platform of choice is. Of course, today is no different, so I'll say it right now. Feel free to do so if you've got some spare moments. If you think that one platform isn't enough and you want to follow along on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. Twitter, however, has me at Trusty Chords Pod. Despite how it looks and sounds, it's not Trusty Chords Pod, though I've got nothing against Spod. We're also on the internet as well, apart from the podcast you're listening to, and there's a blog on my own website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's tylerjenke/trustychordspodcast, all one word. That's where you'll find entries on each episode each week and a list of all the artists, albums and songs chosen by my guests and the accompanying playlist too. You can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running if you feel so inclined. If you actually want to buy me a coffee, that's fine too. I'm a flat white, no sugar. Of course, thanks to everyone who continues to listen, message, or just support this podcast in any way. I'm forever grateful to hear from you all each and every week. Lastly, I need to thank Kevin Devine for being such a wonderful and timely guest this week. I also need to express my gratitude to Neem at Diamond Creative for helping organise this chat as well. Keep your ears peeled, Neem will be a guest on here at some point soon too. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.